Wow, an amazing collection of individuals. I'm kind of very humbled to present our research with and I'm very excited because the point of this workshop is to really half and half, like we're going to present what we do, but I'm just really interested in what all of you do, and your research interests are so remarkably entwined with what we do. And big fan of Erica's work. When we wrote our big short grant, Erica was heavily quoted, and so it's so exciting to have these sort of crossover collaboration. Makes us out in Nova Scotia, you feel a little less lonely, that we have these awesome collaborators in Poland and in Montreal, people that we have a cross interest in. So I guess I should introduce myself. Okay, yeah, sorry, I'm going off. My name is Solomon. He, him pronouns. I teach at NathCAD University. And yeah, I guess that's probably, if you want to speak to that.
I'm Ola Janus, and I'm part of TTTM project, the network. I am based in Warsaw, Poland, and I'm mostly interested in the history and legacy of the Holocaust in Poland.
And I'm Angela Henderson. I also teach at the Special College for Art and Design in design and craft, and I'm a visual artist.
So yeah, so our group, the Counter Memory Activism group, is what we call our group, and it's basically a collection. Sorry, should I say it slower? I talk very quickly when I get very excited, so just maybe someone give me hand signal and say. But yeah, so we're called the yeah, is that okay?
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, she's probably.
Yeah, is that okay? Perfect. Great. Yeah, so we are in an interdisciplinary cluster of folks who are artists, activists. We have scholars of difficult history and genocide studies, both of them that can do. I can do that, or you want it? I don't know if I do that either. Okay, cool. Yeah, so folks doing scholars of memory and genocide studies. And yeah, and so we have sort of different areas of study. So we're kind of like our work, and especially what we're showing today, is focused specifically in Poland in our collaboration with Ola Zapomniane. Sorry, my pronunciation, although I do a little bit of Polish, but my pronunciation is horrible. So our collaborations that we've been working with them for about, well, there was a COVID break, but our initial research was about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, so maybe I'll just let you know a bit about the other work, people that are collaborating with us as well. We have many students working around issues around repatriation and language reclamation, and students from various communities. We are based in Chibuktuk, which is Mi'kmaq, which is the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And so there are sort of a side of researchers who are doing work with their home communities and creating work in conjunction with us. And we are presenting all of this work at a symposium, which Trina will be studying work as well, which is at the end of the month. And my mind is kind of half there because I'm organizing that, so I'm a little bit like, but it's going to be awesome. And it is actually all online as well, so you are welcome to join us via Zoom. And I will, if there's any necessity to, if anyone wants the links or anything, just let me know and I can kind of give you the link so you can come. The panels are all online. The performances and exhibitions we won't have online, but we'll have documentation of it so we can cool. Yeah, so we'll have documentation of the exhibition. There's performances, there's about 3 or 4 different exhibitions. It's really intense, but it's going to be super awesome. So yeah, so please join us virtually. So before we start, I guess there's a few terms that I'd love to unpack with the group, and I have my kind of take on it, but I would love to hear from you after we present. And we're kind of basically going to be focusing this workshop sort of in terms of specific questions. Yeah, so I guess the first word I'm curious about is like memory activism and what that elicits in your, in your fields or your research. I can say specifically within our context, when we talk about memory activism, with our research, there's obviously this component of sort of public outreach and education. So we just came back from a rather bizarre, I shouldn't say bizarre. The conference was interesting, at times baffling. We just came back from Lessons and Legacies conference, which is, I guess, the Holocaust conference and it was fascinating, some of the missteps and some of the in my opinion, and also some of the awkward moments, severely awkward moments that were at the conference. I'm not saying that I have the answers, but I think actually we have a fourth person who's part of our group, Dorota Glowacka, who is not here, but actually we're very happy that Erica Lehrer will be playing the part of Dorota today. So Dorota, after having an experience at Lessons and Legacies that was just kind of elicited a lot of concern, wrote down some notes, and so Erica, I'm really grateful that you're going to be playing Dorota at the part of channeling Dorota as part of the presentation. So yeah, so memory activism for us is the fine line between, I would say, that the didactic and the aesthetic. So, and that's a question that we've had throughout our exhibitions. Like, so as artists, when you specifically are approaching sort of concepts of difficult history, how is it that we are able to both have, use our means of artistic production and, with abstraction, with concept of abstraction, subjectivity, yet also be able to present the information that we feel necessary in order to create an educated environment for education of the public. So in our exhibitions thus far, we've always had this sort of like balance of didactic information that we presented either outside or as part of the exhibition, and then the exhibition itself. So I'm curious about that tension, and I think that's a really interesting conversation about that line. And then of course we talk about this idea of the counter monument, which of course I don't think we need to really necessarily introduce that concept with everyone here. But I look at our work that we've been producing over the last 3 years, and I kind of almost think that it's almost like a counter monument, because counter monuments, have a very specific aesthetic of absence, and I would say very Eurocentric idea of materiality. But a lot of the work that we've been doing specifically is not about absence; it's about radical presence, and also a really I would say a really focused discussion and reflection on materiality of presence. So that's something that we're kind of interested in sort of turning around and seeing. So is there a word counter monument? But I'm not sure. There's probably a better word for that many of you have somewhere that in your own research, but that's something that we're interested in. Oh yeah, we have the QR code still. Cool. So oh, is the QR code working, or is it? Yeah. Yeah, sure, absolutely. Totally.
There's a big rapid volume that's actually going to come out later this year, I think, called Memory Activism, and I just wanted to read. It's you've got Zapomniane and Janus.
Thanks.
Their definition of memory activism is the strategic commemoration of a contested past outside state channels to influence public debate and policy. That's
a wonderful definition. Love it. Love it. Yeah, I love that. That's great. And it's interesting because memory activism also, I think, as we're learning, especially with our collaborators and folks on our grant, like it's something that, it's interesting how it's being presented in different contexts. History's, the Holocaust, which has conferences, books, and it's just so exhaustive in some sense, in terms of the discourse. And then there's other, obviously, especially when we're talking about comparative genocide, where the discourse is just absolutely not exhaustive, in fact, sometimes non-existent. So I'm curious, memory activism, that term, how it sort of relates in those specific contexts. So I'm very curious about that. And I'm learning a lot from our collaborators as they approach these issues and topics. So it's been very fruitful for us. Thanks for that, Erica. That's great. I really appreciate that. Email me that book if you don't mind. The reference there. So I'm a bit of a nerd. I like QR codes. So you don't have to, but if you want to pull out your phone and scan this, you'll basically just get to the questions that we're going to be talking about during the group. But although what the weird thing is, I just noticed this during we don't really we kind of don't need it, because I'm going to put the questions up after during our discussion, but I kind of like QR codes. And the reason why I like QR codes is because, again, one of our collaborators that I'm learning from, we have a collaborator who's doing a project called the Difficult History Database. So they're an indigenous scholar who's doing some work. Their home community, I think, is in Ontario. So I apologize, specific. But anyway, so they are doing this work where they're going around Halifax and sort of analyzing and also pointing out various spaces where obviously unreconciled difficult history exists and is not even available for public for further information. So what they're doing is they're actually creating a series of QR codes and almost like, illegally putting up, various stickers and various posters so people can scan it and then learn more about why the space is a space of difficult history. And on top of that, they're also doing kind of a web project that you can link to sort of do it from the comfort of your home if you don't want to walk around or you have issues about mobility. So from their work, I was really kind of like, yeah, I love QR codes, but I used to think it was just for buying groceries, but it's not. And that work also, that website is available for you to look at, the difficult history database. It's being launched as part of our symposium, and it's available for you to sort of, peruse and learn something. But basically, it's just this. It's just these 4 questions. So if you don't want to use a QR code, we'll have it here. So the way that we're going to be structuring this talk is basically each of us are taking on a question and then contextualizing our own practice within the question. So I will be going first when I'm specifically going to be, what's that? What? Oh, the conference. Yeah, okay. We'll call this a conference. So question 1, art as witness and material testimony. So what is the status of artistic work as witness and the artist's role in mediating this form of material testimony? Alexandra will be doing number 2, which is around ethics, forensics, and aesthetics. So what are the ethics of combining forensics and aesthetics and the moral limits of abstraction? Fascinating, that's a really fascinating topic. Question 3, data and research creation. So Angela will be about that. How can data be interpreted in research creation and in artistic production? And question 4 will be, again, Eric will be reading Dorota's notes and playing the part of Dorota about site-specific work in difficult history. So the word conference is in there, but we did write this for the conference we were just at. That, again, was a bit of an interesting and strange experience. So it's great to bring that back here and, I guess, debrief with like-minded folks about sort of how this is a question that is just so remarkably nuanced and just so rich with conversation. And also, I would say there's so much potential for misunderstandings, pitfalls, and probably not understanding what appropriate protocol in these discussions. Something that I'm learning about as well. I'm not saying I'm an expert on this, but I think these discussions are really fascinating. So what does it mean to remove site-specific artwork from its context, given that our conference we were at and even our discussions here today are physically situated at the site of another ongoing genocide? How can we juxtapose these difficult histories without imposing a dominant narrative? So that's another question that we're going to sort of conclude our talk with. Is that cool? Sound good? Yeah? Stop me at any time if you have some questions. So question 1, art as material witness and and material testimony. So I'm a filmmaker. Actually, I did my master's here at Concordia, and I taught at Concordia for a short period of time before I moved to Nova Scotia for a full-time position. And I as someone that works specifically in analog technology, I was very curious about how I could bring my practice into a more site-specific setting, and how perhaps, based on, I would say, something I've thought about for a very long time, the encounter of the analog with space and all the sort of philosophical ideals that entails, how that could sort of help with creating site-specific works in a respectful way. And also, obviously, reciprocity with landscape is something that is a concern for all of us, and understanding what that means. So for me, I should specifically contextualize our work in Poland was in pretty much in the, I guess, more kind of like southeast or more east. We're a little bit south, right? Yeah, south, very close to the Ukrainian border, actually, right? And our original research we're in 5 sites. We visited some other spaces in urban centers, but we're in 5 sites where there are, recognized spaces that have been done by your organization, where there's mass grave sites, and various memory activists in the communities have sort of assisted the research organization as well to sort of help pinpoint where these spaces are. And Oleg's going to talk more about the idea, for Jewish halakha, because they are, spaces where, the victims were Jewish. The way you access those spaces is very dictated by Jewish law, meaning that you cannot excavate, you can't disturb it, the only way, and please correct me at any time I'm wrong, so you're going to talk about it in a much more sophisticated way. But you have to just sort of, you have to use non-invasive technologies to access these space. And Alexander's going to go into much more detail on that. But as a filmmaker, I'm trying to figure out, what do I do? And I'm not the sort of person that's interested in doing kind of documentary work. I find, I'm always sort of really reflecting the idea of like how form and content can be really can be conjoined in an interesting way, in an innovative way, and to find a way of creating innovative form through radical subjectivity to your interaction with space. So what I did is I called phytograms. And what phytograms are is that you collect the flora of the area, and you what I did is I have all this and it expired 16mm film stock. So this is 16mm film here. It's kind of like really thin. And what I did is I would collect the flora and I would soak it in a biodeveloper. And what it is, and so it's again, it's not chemical, so it's something that in the space wouldn't disturb what's actually happening there. And it creates a chemical reaction in the plant life, creating and with this chemical reaction, what it does is it's sort of like kind of radical site specificity with analog technology. And it's really interesting that sort of like, I would say, encounter both history here on Turtle Island, which is the Pier 21. And, as a descendant of Holocaust survivors, we're going to talk about in a second, we always see it as like, oh, Pier 21 is a place of freedom, and it's always been presented like, you're free, you come, whatever. But that's obviously such a ridiculous myth. I mean, it's really the site of invasion and dispossession. So we were invited to show work there during and actually, Erica, you were there as well, right? You were presenting some work during that exhibition. And, so we were invited to talk about one genocide on a site, which was kind of grounds, really essentially philosophical grounds of another site of genocide and dispossession. So what we did, and we're going to talk a little bit more of that when we talk about Andrew's work, is we were really, we used the architecture of the space to exhibit the work. And as a way, and then there are also various strategies that should be used, which we'll talk about later, about contextualizing the space that we're in respectfully within the context of our research in Poland. But this, I just thought I'd show you a slide here. And then for our exhibition in Halifax, they're all being transformed into light boxes, which is, they're really exciting. I'm excited about it. But okay, I want to go on to Feivel. So this is Feivel Feldman. This is my grandfather. And so my grandfather was a survivor from Warsaw. As we know, I think maybe less than 30% of the people who were residents of Warsaw, maybe even less, survived the war. So Feivel, I don't know, Feivel came to Canada and, met his partner in a DP camp. These are his papers from the DP camp. And, back then when they were pairing up survivors, there was no wooing romantic. It's like, they're basically just pairing people up, you with you, you with you, you with you. And they're just like, yeah, of course, it's just a matter of moving on. Yeah, sorry. Oh, sorry.
Protect those people against the society around them, and so it's not like another.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that, Claire. Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, so they just paired them up. And so, like many survivors, there's actually incredible discourses around Holocaust studies about the idea of silence and people not sharing their stories. And so he told us nothing. We don't know anything about his survival story. We don't know anything about like why he was the only one that survived. We don't even know if there may have been other survivors, but there was nothing. And even in my family, saying the word Holocaust would be so epically triggering that we just couldn't say it. We couldn't even say the word Holocaust. And we had a bomb shelter in our basement. I didn't know why, but now I'm realizing, yeah, that's why we had a bomb shelter. It's called second generation trauma. But it thought it was okay. Bomb shelter, Winnipeg, Manitoba, odd, but whatever. But nonetheless, so Feivel was silent, and I was trying to figure out. Well, it came to a point where I was trying to figure out what my own. I lived in Poland for 2 years previous to even doing this research. That's where I met a good friend of mine who's now part of the organization that works with Ola. And my work when I lived in Poland was not actually. It was more just kind of film-based work, and was working with the Jewish community there. And fiction, it's interesting in Holocaust studies because sometimes fiction is seen as the enemy, right? Because maybe perhaps it's something that could be, if you're not specifically accurate about showing specific proofs of atrocity, there could be issues of, around verification, whether or not you are actually sort of helping to, fight against those who are in any sort of denial around the atrocity that actually happened. So I like that tension between fiction and fact. But for me, I thought, well, I'm going to create a speculative history of my family and integrate it somehow into a film project. And so what I did is I kind of became obsessed with this guy's writing. So Rav Kalimos Kalman Shapira, also known as the Esh Kodesh, was the rabbi of the ghetto. And he was writing, so in Judaism, you write, they're called the Bar Torahs. So basically every week when you're praying, you pick a piece of the Bible, Torah, and you give an interpretation of it. So this guy's like super like Hasidic, very religious, and everything that he's sort of talking about at this point in the ghetto is like, why is it happening to us? What did I do wrong? And then eventually, and he miraculously survived to the very end of the ghetto, and then he was brought to another work camp where he died. But he was able to like write an incredible history of the ghetto from a Hasidic perspective. And I find it fascinating. And his work survived in the Oneg Shabbat archive, which those of you know it was the Ringelblum archive, Oneg Shabbat. I guess it has the two names, right? And they were, and actually Ola was very, kind of was the first one to sort of tell me about this. We were in Poland, and I went to Jewish Circle Institute and just became obsessed with it. And so basically, there were a series of ethnographers, would you say, anthropologists,
various people,
activists, actually memory activists, who were documenting the ghetto life and actually collecting papers from folks and art, and beautiful artworks of ghetto life. And they were collecting it and they were storing it in these the ones that were found, these containers, one set of milk crates and one set of boxes, correct? And so Rav Kalimos Kalman Shapira, someone took his writings and he gave it to them and they deposited it in this archive. So of course, after the ghetto uprising, everything was destroyed and there was one person that survived, right? So please correct me.
More than one, but there was one who helped to find it.
And who knew where it was, and actually discovered two of the stashes, and the third one is yet unfound, rumored to be underneath the Chinese embassy. So then for me as a filmmaker, I'm like, yes, that's it. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix my own family history, which is silent, with the history of a larger factual history of Rav Kalman Shapira. And then I'm going to deposit their work in the third unfound archive, which is underneath the Chinese embassy in Warsaw. So I created this film, and I'm going to show you a very quick clip, then I'm going to switch over to one of my colleagues. And so I basically took 3D scans. Actually, I'll just show it while I talk. Is it really going to bother you if I talk over the film? It's okay, right? Just pretend. Oh yeah, you know what? Because otherwise well, because I'm going to go a little bit further on here. It's right. So. Yeah, start here. So the only thing that survived from Fievel's Philip, as he became known in Canada, and Pavel would be his Polish name, right? Were these documents from his that he brought with him to Canada, his DP papers, various certificates that he brought with him. So what I did is I sort of, together with my collaborators, I did these 3D scans, and I basically placed them in what I would see them all like as the undiscovered third archive of the Oneg Shabbat activist group, I would call them. And then I also wanted to integrate it somehow with my research that we're doing in these 5 sites of unmarked mass graves in Poland. So what I did after I sort of collected this and sort of put it within the stash, I have one of the milk cans, which you'll see coming up, where we have, the 5 landscapes that we were doing research in. And I don't know if anyone knows the technology of photogrammetry. So basically it's when you take a photo and you scan an object and you create a 3D object based on those photo scans. So I collected some of the photos that I took while I was doing the research and some films, and I created these 3D landscapes that you'll see are inside of this the last jug here. But I'm thinking, okay, well, these landscapes are so, are mutated, are scarred, are radically transformed by the trauma that that's hidden inside them. I wouldn't say hidden, but it's there. I would say nesting inside them, if I can use that word. So I thought, well, how do I play with the idea of, a mutation of memory, mutation of representation? And I thought, well, there's got to be a better word than the idea of transmutation, transmogrifying, I don't know. But I thought, well, obviously there's a better word. there's a Hebrew word, which actually is also a Yiddish word and also a Polish word. It's balagan, right? Balagan, which is basically this concept of everything kind of an absolute upheaval, right? Everything kind of messed up. And also I would, so for me, like this is the ultimate sort of I would say manifestation of the concept of balagan. And the idea of landscape being scarred, landscape being formed by the histories that are embedded within them. So I guess maybe it's a different sort of reciprocity, but it's maybe with the digital medium rather than sort of actual physical material of a landscape. And also, I was very interested to learn from one of my students that I work with that actually the term glitch. Everyone knows what glitch is. Kind of like when there's a digital technology that's being maybe malfunctioning in a way and creating. And you can see this different glitches here. You can't really see it. It's a bit dark.
It's very dark, but yeah.
Oh, that's too bad. Okay. Can you see a little bit of it?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, it is a bit dark. But yeah. Anyway, so I'll just pause it then. So. Yeah, so I forgot, I actually lost my train of thought, but it's okay.
Glitch.
Glitch, yes. So glitch actually itself is also a Yiddish term, which I didn't know, and I found that really fascinating. Yeah. So if anyone actually wants to copy the film, it's just being finished now, like in time for our exhibition. So if you want to actually be able to see it in brighter circumstances, I'm happy to email it to you. You can see it a bit better. But yeah. So I remember I was supposed to do like, oh, look at that, it worked. Okay, good. So glitch means, as far as I remember, it literally means kind of a break. It means kind of like distortion. Yeah, distortion. Yeah, like and it's interesting philosophically too. The idea of distortion, the idea of the static and communication theory is really something that is, really kind of often brought up. And that's what. So someone that a student that's doing their master's with me, and I learned that from them, and then then we did some incredible research. The glitch and bubblegum. You can kind of see the images a bit better here. Sorry about the film being so dark. But cool. And we'll switch on. Thank you.
I'll just check if there are some urgent questions. I think Alex is speaking. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we can also send the link to the video later on. So this is question number 2. So combining ethics and ethics of combining forensics and aesthetics. And this is something that's very interesting to me in my work. And I would like to start with the anecdote. So many of you probably know the group that is called Forensic Architecture. They are goldsmiths, and they use the architectural means and tools and like 3D modeling and different types of tools to actually create evidence of, for example, violation of human rights or genocidal violence. And so they are doing work that is like it's an activist work, and it's also related with like providing evidence to for example, courts. But at the same time, there is a very specific aesthetics to it. And in 2018, they were nominated to the Turner Prize, so an art prize. And the leader of the group, A.L. Weizmann, he asked the question he said, I'm surprised and stunned by the Turner Prize nomination. And he asked the question, will it help promote forensic architecture's goals and research, which matters, or will it subject us to the artistic and financial complex? And what risks are you exposing yourself to? And I think that's a very important question. And I'm interested in what does it mean to narrate crime through artistic means, and to engage art to uncover sites of trauma and to call for taking responsibility for the fate of the victims who are there. And does not the marriage of the aesthetic and the forensic lead to a transformation of a crime into an exciting aesthetic experience? Or doesn't the activity of an investigator artist simplify complicated investigative procedures in the public perception, taking away possibly their argumentative power, for example? And doesn't the artistic presentation of evidence of a crime provide object veils that rather obscure than help to present its blunt empirical character? So to put it bluntly, does not the art of investigation fetishize the process of searching for evidence losing its practices in its practice what is most important, so the fate of the victims. And this is the question that I'm confronting these questions on and on in my own practice. So I wanted to show you a few examples of the work that I've been involved in to sort of like maybe use them as a reference to what to discuss these questions later. So there was an exhibition that I had the privilege to be a part of that was focused on the wartime Jewish hideouts. And what you see here are casts of the actual preserved to this day wartime Jewish hideouts from the Second World War. So a friend of mine who's an artist, I was doing the research part of the project and she did the artistic part. So a friend of mine who is an artist, we visited the hideouts together, and then she created the cast of parts of the hideout that were then turned into sculptures, covered on one side with high probe silver, on the other side with an earthy substance, and then exhibited in an art gallery, right? And there were a lot of questions arising, and some people were raising questions. Oh, maybe that's actually fetishizing the spaces that we were discussing, or maybe some also ask the question, well, the use of silver can be interpreted as an attempt to actually turn it into a sacred object or something that has like very Christian connotation, right? There was a lot of discussion around that, and there was a very particular and very conscious curatorial decision to present these artworks, these sculptures, in separation from the research room. That was the research room, as we called it, where we presented all the results of the research project, so objects, documents, evidence, 3D scans, and so on and so forth. So there was this like very particular decision related with the aesthetics of the objects and how they're used in the gallery space, and the very decision of taking these objects to the gallery space was something that was also important. The artist, a friend of mine who is an artist, she said that her intention was to actually elevate these gloomy, smelly, awful, often dirty spaces, and create a sort of monument to these sites that will never be turned into, they will never have monuments on site because they are private property, they are difficult to access, and so on and so forth. But I think it's a great point of reference to actually talk about the question of what are the consequences of combining forensics and aesthetics, and you can see some of the objects that were presented in the research room over here. So this is one example. Another example is the work that the foundation that I represent does in Poland. So we are an NGO that specializes in searching for, locating, marking, and commemorating uncommemorated burial sites of the Jewish victims of the Holocaust located on the territory of Poland. And we estimate there is over 1,000 of them, probably even maybe 2,000. And since 2014, we have been able to locate 300 of them. And we document, we study them using non-invasive archaeology, because as Solomon said, according to the Jewish religious law, the halacha, it is forbidden to disturb the remains. So our research produces a lot of material, like, for example, we work with ground penetrating radar that I think you're familiar with in the Canadian context. So this is a geophysical method that allows you to track anomalies that are located underground. And then on the basis of interpretation of that data and other types of data, we can then, with some level of precision, speculate that this is where the burial site is located. But so we provide access to these materials on our website, but at the same time, we also are looking for means to actually raise awareness about this Holocaust by bullets, as it's called. So the part of Holocaust that was actually just killing in public space in Poland outside of the camps. So we're trying to raise awareness about that. So we also look for artistic means to communicate the data that we produce. And what we did is that we for example, created these, you can call it sculptures or installations, in which we present the GPR echograms, so the images that are proving that there are anomalies underground in a given site, and we turn these these very scientific and obscure images into an object like this, so that people can actually look and see how certain, like, how the anomaly can be seen in this particular image that is here presented on plexiglass. But again, it also, I think, the question that I am discussing, kind of like, it's relevant in the case of the work like this. And so what we also do is we have started to document the sites that we study, and this is one of them. So you can see how these sites where human remains are buried look like in Poland. So we started like photographing them using analog photography that is very high res. So this is another example. So, and in each and every photo, the burial site is at the center of the photography. So this is, so you can also see it over here. And we started documenting them using analog photography and then presenting them along with a very detailed geodetic measurements and geographical coordinates of the boundaries of the burial sites, because according, again, to Jewish religious law, it is of profound importance that the actual perimeters, that the actual site of the burial site is known. It's measured because it has to be protected. So this is like of a great importance. So this we use for archiving purposes, but we also use it. We also exhibit it sometimes. So that's the question. And the last example is of a very different nature. This is a performative piece that I co-created. And it was in relation to a site of the former concentration camp in Krakow. It's called KL Plaszow. And this is a concentration camp that has not been commemorated. There is a monument there that you can see here, but the monument does not do justice to the victims because it doesn't name the victims. It's not said that they were Jews who were in this camp. It's just like to the martyrs of Hitler's violence. So it's like very generic and very vague. And the site is like, it's 40 hectares and the monument is just in one place. So neither the mass graves nor the pre-war Jewish cemeteries or other killing sites that are on this terrain are not actually marked there. So it's a vast green area where people come to jog, to walk their dogs, to cycle, to spend time with children. So what we did, we created this performative piece on the basis of a choreography of an Israeli choreographer, Noah Eshkol, who created a choreography to commemorate. It was a commemorative choreography in the 50s to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And there was only a tiny bit of archival footage left. So we only have access to a very tiny bit of this choreography, historical choreography, but we took that and we decided to work with that to actually create a commemorative piece for this particular site. And it was intended as a repetitive work. So we are performing that there annually around Sukkot, so a Jewish holiday, and we treat that as a temporary monument that is being like created there by the performance, and it's accompanied by an audio recording in which we site and the future of this former campsite. It's actually now a subject of a heated debate in Poland, because the state, like the museum, the city, the state, they want to commemorate it but the way they envision the commemoration of the site is very, let's say, traditional and conservative, you might say, because a reference point for them are sites like Auschwitz-Birkenau. So a very different sort of, like a very typical memorial museum, while we have a vast green area that is surrounded by housing, by, like housing estates, and people live there. And Krakow is a very densely built city with very little green areas. So obviously there is a heated debate because these people, they want this site to be commemorated, but they don't want to lose this site as a green area. So while this conversation is very difficult and sort of like very often like they just stuck and the whole project is not really moving forward too fast, we introduced the performative piece into the site to gather people, the inhabitants of the area, the people who walk their dogs there, and other people to gather around it and actually discuss and maybe try to negotiate the future of the site. Yeah.
We talked about that the choreography is like not well documented.
Yeah.
And like the process of reconstructing it.
Yeah.
Is there also an aspect of repertoire where you like teach others these choreography so that they can like?
So there's nothing like that, but that's an interesting idea. And thank you for now. So it's just we took this original choreography of Noah Eshkol and we worked with what was left, so the fragments of it, and work with choreographer and then my friend choreographer and then Weronika Perczynska to actually created this new piece on the basis of the fragment that we had. But actually now we were invited by the Museum of the History of Polish Jews to actually now like turn this piece into a piece for like 80 people, and some of them will be just regular people. So we are moving to a next stage of like actually teaching this choreography to people to create a commemorative performances. But that's I think it's going to happen in May 2023. So now I'm going to hand it over to Angela.
I was just mentioning there's this amazing Israeli group. I don't know to what extent they still exist, but called Public Movement, that did a piece about 10 years ago called Spring in Warsaw that led whoever wanted to join through this amazing sort of commemorative choreography related to the Holocaust, but also opening out into many contemporary issues of multiculturalism, et cetera, in Warsaw. Shameless plug, actually, me and my colleague Magdalena Waligórska have an article that we kind of analyze it as well. If anybody's interested, I can send it to them. But it's a interesting proto example of what it might look like to engage people in an embodied way in different, I don't know, feeling your body in a different way in that kind of space.
Yeah, and I can actually add to that because the public movement is a movement that they kind of like the group divided themselves, so that's they are no longer one group. But what's interesting about the thing that they did is that they actually created this like huge. I think it was attended by over 1,000 people in Warsaw. So it was a huge event. It was a march, because a reference point for them were the marches of Israeli youth coming to Poland as part of this like Holocaust tour, let's just call them. And so they were trying to create like a counter narrative and a counter action, I would say, to this type of experiencing Poland as a site where people come to actually, commemorate, mourn, learn about the Holocaust.
And they were trying to do it specifically in a non-nationalistic way, so breaking that Israeli national frame. And I should also say, you can find a video online. I think it's on Vimeo, and I don't know, in Polish it's Wiosna w Warszawie, but maybe it's under Spring in Warsaw, I'm not sure, but it's worth looking at. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, so I can send, Shelly, so I'll give you the computer so that you can ask your question.
So I see, like I look here.
Yeah,
I get it. I zoom. Okay, Ola, this is a question for you. So as you were describing the work with the foundation and particularly standing still.
Yeah.
No, sorry, still standing. Yes. I was thinking about how I was thinking about the question of collaboration and also about Jewish community. I'm in my mind, I have an assumption that the group is probably predominantly Polish practitioners who are not Jewish, and that scenario would not translate here, that way of practicing. So I'm kind of curious about how you the ethics of doing this work as a Polish non-Jewish person.
So actually the group is mixed. Okay. So it's but like these are non-Jewish Poles and Jewish Poles, and it was created as part of a Jewish Polish festival that is and that is organized by the festivals that some of you know. So the Jewish Polish Arts and Activist Collective. So there was this, so we were very careful with actually not just doing that. And one of the choreographers is Jewish Israeli. So that's we were very careful about that. But at the same time, there's obviously the specificity of the Polish example is that it is true that like we kind of both work with the Jewish community, but also with the non-Jewish Polish community that actually in the Polish reality, they have to, like we think they have to take, let's say, responsibility for some of these sites, because the Jewish community of Poland is so small that we can't burden this community with responsibility for whatever doesn't comes over 1,600 cemeteries and probably around 2,000 uncommemorated burial sites. So this is a way of like engaging non-Jewish Poles in recognizing this history as part of local memory cultures, because we see that challenge that otherwise, there is in Polish context, and I think that's different from here, but I'm not that much familiar with the context, like, I'm not from here. So I think that the issue is that perceiving that sites as only Jewish sites, we kind of burden this very tiny little community that doesn't have too much resources with all the responsibility for maintaining all that, which we think is a wrong thing to do.
I mean, that side that you're talking about is very resonant and important here too.
Yeah.
Folks are ready here.
Yeah.
But we can ask one more question.
It wasn't. Hi, everyone. It wasn't actually a question, but just a comment, or just a connection when you were talking about the speculative history around your family, and then you're talking about this fragment of the choreography, and then it was like a speculative choreography, and I just thought that was a beautiful connection between your two practices.
Thank you. And speculative is a word that really gets thrown around.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Angela Henderson, and I also have worked with the research collective in Poland. Okay, sorry for the delay.
We're golden.
So I'm going to show you actually some of my own work without other examples today, and I'm going to focus specifically on site-specific processes, embodied practices of mapping as a means of generating data, and the ways in which form affects the representation of data. So the question here is, how can data be interpreted in research creation and in artistic production? So the first project I want to share with you was part of a series of artistic activities that we've talked about here, undertaken with the Zapomniane Foundation, that was intended to demarcate the forest sites where human remains have been located. Reflecting on this term, I'm drawn to what Roma Sendika talks about, or coins the term non-sites of memory, and that being what she describes as sites of past genocide left with no memorial markers or inadequate ones, not neutralized by rituals of commemoration, that something in these places is perceptibly off. And so the effects of these non-sites of memory are really on the visitors to this site. And that was something that in my own experience in being in these or visiting these places that really kind of informed my thinking on how to begin to think about mapping the places. So just for like a little bit of context, when we arrived to these spaces, we spent some time just being in the space. We were with people who had been there before and it was familiar to them, but being new to the space, it kind of was like a little bit of uncertainty about, okay, well, what do we do here now that we're here? So upon arriving to these sites, I kind of was thinking more about the ecology of the space as witness, which there's many people who are thinking and about this as well. And my kind of impulse was to locate the oldest tree in the space, thinking that, you know, these would have been trees that stood at the time of the murders. They would have witnessed those events. So in terms of so in the small towns around these sites, there's, you know, a general store, like you know, kind of has a little bit of everything. So I took some craft paper and just like jute string, so things you might use in your home to wrap stuff or tie plants or whatever. I began by wrapping the oldest tree with the jute string and then marking the circumference of the tree, and then carrying over to the next oldest tree, to the next oldest tree, to the next oldest tree, to demarcate the site or to create an arrow, proper pronunciation, or a border around where the site had been identified by the first witness account, is where it began from. So in this work, what you're looking at in this image is a witness tree. I also put the craft paper on the witness tree and then created a frottage or a contact print. And then once the string ran the perimeter, rewound the string with the markings of the trees and carried it away. So still not really knowing what to do with that material, but this very kind of provisional or simple way of creating a map. And I think what's important to note about this project, which you're looking at here, is, which is a very bad image, but is the string wound around these forms that we created in with a local woodworker collaborator, Alex. And what they are is the pieces hanging down are the dark, like the circumference of the tree, and the pieces wrapped around are the distances between. So and then they were exhibited in a gallery, which you also don't see here. But what I think is important is that the materials used, or provisional materials, and how they have one use, as they would be bought to be used, day to day. But then when taken to these sites, used in this way as a tool, and then brought back into the gallery as an art object, I think that there's something about the kind of, I don't know how to say it, like the effect of the material is not a fine art material, it becomes something else. There's something sort of disjointed about that. So then with that same process, what you see here with the person in the foreground is marking a GPS point as well, where these witness trees are located. So taking that same information that now has, direct measure between it via the GPS location, branches that I collected in a local forested space after a silviculture project where a lot of trees in that were cut in a park in Nova Scotia. And then kind of measuring out the distance in a new string. Again, I'm mapping those forested sites onto these forms that you see here. So really the source data, it remains the same, but the form offers a different representation of this data. And then I'll exhibit it alongside these works. So the work here was exhibited in a library space. In the center there, you have an archive with more didactic information. You're not looking at it now, but people could go into the center for more information about the context of the project. But the objects you see here that were exhibited are actually the landscapes where we had visited and mapped the forested sites. So taking that, again, Google Earth data and then creating a 3D model image of it, I printed it with a CNC on the material of oak, which also has a significance in relation to these sites, given that it's a protected, in parts, a protected tree in Poland. So depending on proximity to the site, there is this kind of possibility that the oak tree could, in fact, be a protection for the site and that it can't be demolished or torn away. So yeah, so the objects here, really, they're a handheld landscape. They sort of take this kind of 3D representation of the site and create this kind of move from macro to micro scale, where the landscape then is something that is about this size, and then finished in beeswax. So it has this kind of hand to it that's softened, I suppose. Okay, and then just moving from there, what you're looking at here is a similar kind of a way of mapping using frottage or a direct contact print. But in this project, we were thinking about, we were invited, as Saul mentioned earlier, to exhibit the work from Poland around the Holocaust in Pier 21, which is the Federal Museum of Immigration. And the question that sort of came forward to us was, well, okay, well, what does it mean to talk about a genocide in a place where we live, with this ongoing genocide that not really, been formally acknowledged by, federal authority or by the Canadian government. So entering that space, I was moving away from the work in Poland, but thinking about some of the same methodologies or ways of working. So what you see here is Citadel Hill. It's a military sort of fortress at the center of Halifax, which is a very, it's a Canadian city that is, if you didn't know any better, everything about it is sort of militarized, or the history of the military is really in the foreground there. So my approach to this project was to create these frottage works of various colonial monuments. So monuments that represent various difficult histories in Halifax, unreconciled difficult histories, and to bring these into the exhibition space as archive. So the objects you're looking at here, they kind of have an embodied quality. I make them to my own height, and they house collectively 12 different sites of difficult history in Jabuktuk. And then this project, it sits in a kind of unconventional exhibition space. It's a transitional space, a hallway, not intended for exhibition. And then the various other works, including the phytograms all presented at the outset, and histories that relate to the Holocaust, are kind of put alongside in these spaces. One other important thing to note is that these forms face out onto what is known as George's Island, which this is the key point of entry for contact when settlers arrived to Turtle Island. There's this kind of questioning of, what I mentioned at the outset, what it means to talk about the Holocaust on a site of difficult history. And I'll just mention the last aspect of this. So you saw here this small tool on the ground. It's populated with these graphite forms that have engraved in them the geolocative data for sites in Poland and the sites of difficult history in Jabuktuk. So it's not about a comparison of these histories in any way, but it's a juxtaposition in a particular context that I think for the viewer, asks us to consider beyond protocol how it is that we reconcile artistic production or the discussion of difficult histories in the site of Jabuktuk. So yeah, that's what I have, and I'll turn it over to
and
Erica.
I think it connects nicely with what Erica will be now talking about. So our last question.
So now, very briefly, I have the great privilege of playing the role of Professor Dorota Głowacka, who is part of the Thinking Through the Museum team, and also part of the Counter Memory Activism team. And just like a tiny piece of context, so I'm reading, she sent me remarks that she made at this conference that was mentioned, Lessons and Legacies in Ottawa earlier this week. And just like I've redacted it just to sort of, because there were some pieces that related more to that context. So I've tried to just pull out what I think are the most important points. But I did just want to say, because she mentions that, like, I think I don't know what she was planning to say, but some of what tipped off what she did say, and I think the sort of heightened affective sort of sensibility with which she said it, is that this conference, so this traditional annual Holocaust conference, began with a big dinner and then a keynote dialogue at the Canadian War Museum. It was a little bit surreal because it was in the hall that had all of these huge tanks and planes like literally surrounding us. And then on the stage were these two wonderful memory scholars, Mariana Hirsch and Anne Petkovich, who proceeded to sort of have a dialogue that attempted in many ways to bring together questions of Holocaust memory and settler colonial genocide memory. And that was something that made a number of people uncomfortable because there were no Indigenous people involved, and there was not sort of problematization of that absence of voice, or much problematization of sort of the engagements themselves. I think maybe that's all I'll say, and these guys can say more if they want. But I think that's sort of what kind of tripped Dorota off in particular. So these are essentially her words. She wanted to raise the question of what does it mean to have this workshop here on, and I'm replacing, it was the Anishinaabe Algonquin territory with Ganagahaka Nation territory. So 2 weeks ago, the Canadian House of Commons had adopted the motion recognizing that residential schools were an act of genocide. The last school closed in 1996, so this is a recent past, but as Indigenous writers and activists keep reminding us, this genocide is an ongoing genocide. Anishinaabe, Leanne Simpson, Pamela Palmater, Mi'kmaq, Daniel Paul, and many others have said this. Is it even possible to address the history of the Holocaust in art here at this location without being complicit in the erasure of that history of mass atrocities that took place in this location? How to do this appropriately, but not in the mode of appropriation? How to relinquish the arrogance of Western systems of knowledge in which the Holocaust discourse is grounded and in discursive practices? Can art practice lead the way in practicing the virtue of epistemic humility? I, Dorota, saw on other occasions as part of counter-memory activism, art practices introduced here in a creative generative dialogue with work by Indigenous artists. There are also important convergences that create opportunities for such dialogue. Dorota said that she encountered Ola and Natalia Romik's work. That's the one with the silver, the casts of the Holocaust hiding places. At a time when unmarked burial sites of children in Canada who were inmates at the Indian residential schools were being discovered, but not yet remains, I believe. Yet, if we consider to what extent that genocidal past impacts Indigenous communities today, is it right to juxtapose artistic representations of these two terrible histories? Unlike art that engages with the history of the Holocaust, Indigenous art has an important political function in the present. It is a statement of the demand for the recognition of the First Nations sovereign right to exist. Is there a danger that bringing together these two histories could obscure this fundamental political role of Indigenous art, or can it be done in such a way that these differences are not only respected, but even amplified? I have a similar question about the entire conceptual framework in which we consider the amazing artwork that we are looking at here. When we are here at another site of genocide, we realize that not a single word or concept is innocent. Words and concepts are implicated in the history of colonialism. Ariel Azulai shows that seemingly universal conceptions of art and aesthetics as they originated in Europe are deeply implicated in the histories of colonialism and genocide. So, and now is just kind of like a series of questions, a long series of questions. Does thinking about these two genocidal histories side by side have the potential to transform traditional aesthetic concepts and presuppositions so as to make them more inclusive? What is the potential of art practice to challenge hegemonic narratives or to excavate potential histories, to bring visibility to histories that have been marginalized or silenced? Does art have a unique ability to challenge traditional narratives and hegemonic accounts of events? Who counts as an artist? What happens when site-specific art practice moves into a space of a gallery? Which gallery? What is a gallery, or what is an art museum? If we start from the question that violence is inscribed in the history of the institutions that house art, she notes again that Azulai's critique of practices of art collection and their role in imperial violence. Site-specific interventions are powerful interventions into these imperialist histories. Art's political potential is art's political potential more effective when it is taken out of a gallery context? But is it in the gallery that different histories reflected in site-specific interventions are brought into a space of encounter? How can the art gallery become a meeting place, a place of welcome? I'll end there. So that is Dorota Głowacka's contribution. So thank you. And
You played her very well.
well, I know and love her for a long time. So